we are in for a treat. Ben Hubbard is our speaker today, and in spite of my recommendations, he did not bring any books to sell today. But this is a photocopy of the cover, if you would like one. And that's what it'll look like when you get it, but it'll be more book-like, rather. This is flat. Entitled A Battlefield of Values, America's Left, Right, and Endangered Center.
Thank you, Randy. Very nice to be here. I love the songs and I love the story, especially. In fact, that story is in some ways a metaphor for what I'm going to be talking about, because the world today is divided into people who either eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches or people who eat pita sandwiches. That's America. Tremendous polarity in the country. So anyway, I do have a text, though. You know, it's always good when you give a speech to any religious group. You have some kind of a spiritual text, either the Bible, Shakespeare, Plato. You know, you folks, of course, have a little wider spectrum of scriptures, which I like, rather than just the Bible, with all due respect to the Bible. My text is the following. It's from 6-year-old Nika, so kind of the same genre as the story. If you want to learn to love better, you start with a friend who you hate. Yeah. Because that's really what America is struggling against right now, is the sense that we're two camps, you know, the guys with the black hats and white hats, or in this case, blue caps and red hats. That's the problem in America. So anyway, I want to tell you how I got to the point of writing this book, because it has a lot to do with my kind of speech and my whole sort of outlook on philosophy, religion, and culture. My writing this book was kind of an accident. Excuse me. I'd done a lot of writing over the years as a professor. You're a professor, you've got to write stuff, you know, either that or you perish, as you know. So anyway, I had a colleague who had drafted me many years ago to write an occasional op-ed column for the Los Angeles Times. And that's when they had an Orange County edition. And so I wrote numerous columns for the Orange County paper Times on the subject of religion, culture, interfaith relations, and so forth. Well, anyway, he moved from being an editor at the LA Times to being director of the School of Communications at Northeastern University in Boston. And one day I sent him an email and said, you know, I'm so fed up with the incredible polarization. In fact, it was right after there had been this governmental shutdown in late, I think, the fall of 2013, when you know, all government buildings were shut down, all war memorials were shut down. It cost the country billions of dollars. It was just ridiculous. And I said, let's write an op-ed column for the Boston Globe, because he had connections at the Boston Globe, living there and being a prominent professor. He wrote back and said, oh, let's write a book about it. So I really had no intention of writing this book. Well, okay. I said, wow, okay, I'm on. I'm in. Let's do it. So it took us a while to finally get a publisher. And we started to really go full tilt in the summer of 2014. We really both began to start grinding out chapters. But in October of that year, he contracted a rare lung disease and died at the age of 66, just kind of out of the blue. I mean, just came up rather suddenly, and he was gone. So anyway, he had written 3 beautiful chapters, but I was left with the other 10 chapters to write. And I really thought for a while that, you know, this is just going to happen. It's just too much for me to, because after all, there had been a division of labor. He had his strengths, I had mine. Together we figured we could pull this book off, this Battlefield of Values book. Well, anyway, I decided I had to go ahead. I had to get the book done. So I did. And in the process, some interesting things happened to me intellectually. By nature, I'm liberal. I happen to be liberal, but I'm also very centrist. I'm kind of a peacemaker kind of guy. I've kind of got nicknamed Gentle Ben, and you know, I tend to just kind of look for the good in other people and look for you know, similarities and cooperation. But what I started to do was I started to read widely in conservative journals like the National Review, the Wall Street Journal, I went to County Register, which I have been reading, of course, for a long time. Yes, I know some people. I started listening more, watching more Fox News, even though sometimes I really had trouble doing so. All due respect to those of you who might like Fox News, but what happened to me was I remained a centrist Democrat, but I gained a much greater appreciation why people can take so many different points of view on the great issues of our time, whether it's religion, culture, or politics. I think I got a much more nuanced and, I think, sympathetic, empathetic view of why people can have so many different points of view about the great issues of our time. And it seemed to me that that's the key, one of the keys to good government, to greater understanding, is this empathy for the fact that very good people can look at things so differently than we do, that is, we, let's say, who are of a more liberal persuasion. So that was quite an awakening for me. Well, the problem now in America is that the center is shrinking. You know, most people in America are saying, this is a centrist country. America tends to be a country that doesn't ever go too much to the right or to the left historically. But in the last 20 or so years, that center has shrunk and the extremes have gotten much stronger. People tend to physically live in parts of the country or communities in different cities where other conservatives or other liberals live there as well. They tend to attend churches which conform to their political persuasions in many cases. Their friends are of one or the other political and religious group. So there's a great sorting out of the population, and people just don't talk to each other. People listen to CNN, never listen to Fox. People read the Register, don't read the LA Times. And so you get this great intellectual split and sorting out of people who look at the other side and say, how can anybody possibly think that kind of nonsense? And you can see it happening now with the political campaign that's going on, because you've got people who, on the one hand, go for Bernie Sanders, people who are fed up with government in one respect, and people who think Donald Trump is the second Messiah on the other side. And it seems to me that we're getting further and further apart. Now, I personally happen to think that Bernie Sanders is a much more intelligent and worthy individual than Donald Trump. But anyway, be that as it may, that's my opinion. You don't have to take that to the bank. So what's happening is that Congress is becoming dysfunctional. It's not getting the people's business done. In fact, we almost had another government shutdown at the end of 2015 when they barely were able to pass a spending bill which will continue on until, I think, October of this year. But that was really close, and I think the only reason it happened is that Paul Ryan convinced the Extreme Freedom Caucus, as they're called, to finally just get real in the interest of making it possible for a Republican to be elected. In other words, if there had been more cynicism about bad government, that it would have been bad for the Republican cause. And so finally we had an agreement. But look at the things that didn't get done. In 2014, the Senate passed a tough, reasonable immigration bill. Nobody liked it completely, but in the end, people said, okay, better than nothing. A path to citizenship for 11 million people after tough fines and learning English and so forth. The bill went to the House, and it just stayed there. It had enough votes to pass, but John Boehner, fearing this Freedom Caucus, 35 to 40 very extreme members of the right wing, would not bring it up for a vote. The House Speaker can do that kind of thing. So the bill languished, and so here we are, no immigration bill whatsoever. The immigration situation is still chaotic. Nobody knows what's going to happen. Trump, of course, wants to send everybody back to Mexico and have the Mexicans build a wall. Yeah, that's going to happen, when pigs can fly. So, you've got that one key area there. Nothing has happened. Gun control. 75 to 80% of all members of the NRA think that a background check for everybody, whether you buy a gun in a gun show or online or in a store, that there should be a background check. I mean, in other words, if you have it in the store, shouldn't you have it everywhere? But the NRA has so intimidated conservative lawmakers with the power of the purse that it's not going to happen. No such legislation is going to get passed, even though the majority of the country would like to see it. Now, I do caution you that if that happened, it would not be nirvana. In other words, it might make a modest difference in terms of some bad guys getting guns, but it would not end the terrible violence which besets this country. After all, 90 people are killed every day as a result of handguns, either murder, suicide, or accidents. That's 330,000 people a year dying from handguns. It's a terrible situation, but the solution to which is not simply, fuller background check. The solution is in better mental health care, a culture of less violence. It's complicated. America is very much a gun culture country. The West was one. That's what we are, and that's not all bad, but it's really gotten out of hand. So, but nothing happened. No legislation, no immigration legislation, no gun control legislation, and so on we go with the people's business just not getting done. Now, what about the future? All right, let's say that Hillary Clinton is elected president. I don't know, maybe she will, maybe she won't. I'm not a guru who predicts, who's going to win elections, but let's say she does. Well, she's got baggage for one thing. She was married to a man who was a great president, but whose personal relations were a little sick, and so there's that baggage. There's Benghazi. There's the email thing. She's been around so long she has baggage, and that, along with her being a Democrat, means the other side's going to hate her. So we're going to continue with a situation where the president who is elected will be hated by about half the country. Now, that situation probably has been occurring to some extent, except maybe for George Washington. I suppose in the sense that everybody loved Washington. After that, people despise Jefferson, for example, even though he got elected. Now, some of that is healthy. I mean, the idea of loyal opposition, of fighting for what you believe in, opposing views you don't like, is healthy. It's good for the polity, for the government. But the hate index is so high. Now, let's say that, on the other hand, a Ted Cruz or Donald Trump or Marco Rubio is elected president. Again, Democrats will despise him. Now, when I say despise, I don't really mean it literally. You'd like to go out and kill the individual, although some people would, of course. What I mean is that it's just like, oh my God, that's the end of it. This person is just absolutely awful. Well, in the end, we have to suck it up and accept who's elected. But what happened with Obama, I think, more than any other president that I can think of, and I did a lot of thinking about this, was suffered so much humiliation and contumely and just utter disrespect. I mean, the Ted Nugents of the world, for example, who said really awful things. The guy who got up in Congress during the State of the Union said, "You lie." For a president to suffer this kind of hatred, it's been just virulent, the hatred against Obama. There's no way to run a country. No matter who's elected, in the end, we are one country. We have business to do. We have things that are good for us to do. Now, the fact is that having conservatives and liberals in the body politic is healthy, just like it's healthy in any group. Even in this congregation, there are people who have different views. Should we help the homeless? Should we not? What should we do? We're always going to be debating policies about government, about how to run a church like this one, how to run a city government like Costa Mesa, whatever, and that is perfectly healthy. I happen to think that evolutionarily speaking, it's built into our genes. Let's take an example. 40,000 years ago, there's a tribe in East Africa, from which most of us came, by the way, and they've got a real problem. One tribe on one side of a huge mountain range has a drought. along with various beetles that are eating up all their crops. So they're just starving. On the other side is a fierce tribe that they know about that are extremely territorial. You just don't go near us or you're dead. So in that tribe, scouts say that they're good. That is, their crops are fine. They didn't have this beetle infestation. So the starving tribe sits down and says, what should we do? We're starving. We've got to get food. We've got to go over to that other side and see if they won't take us in and help us. And of course, another group says, no, if we go, we're all dead. That's all there is to it. So they go back and forth, what should we do, what should we do? And finally, they come up with a plan. We'll ask for volunteers, and those volunteers will then go and sue for peace and understanding. They may be killed, but at least we've done something. If not, we're all going to starve. And so, I'll let you tell the end of that story for yourselves, the end of that parable. But the fact is that something got done because two groups of people with different points of view gradually came together and found a compromise. By the way, a word about compromise. In a lot of circles now, the word compromise is considered weakness. Compromise is wisdom. Now, of course, I mean, you can say, well, I'm never going to compromise my principles, okay? I'm not going to cheat on my wife. I'll never compromise my principles and cheat on my wife. Okay, fine. That's one kind of compromise. But the other one is what's called the art of the deal. It's the art of the politics is the art of the possible. You've got to make painful decisions to get anything done. And our country is not making political reality, and not making deals. We're not coming together and saying we've got to look out for the common good of the entire country rather than the common good of our own party. And that's why, one of the reasons why we're in such bad shape. So, as I said, we need liberals, we need conservatives, we need Republicans and Democrats and Socialists and Green Party. All these people have a place in our body politic. But when there's nothing but suspicion about the other side, conspiracy theories, just all this kind of claptrap that we hear about, it's just, it's very, very sad because it just poisons the well in terms of any kind of cooperation. So, why is this? What are the sources of this suspicion and hatred on each side? Well, for conservatives, I would list a number of things. One of them is that the pro-choice view of most liberals, that is allowing abortion in some circumstances, which I think should be seldom and rare but safe, fine. Conservatives hate that. They feel that all liberals are baby killers. There's the whole gay rights business, gay marriage. Conservatives find that just to be an abomination, intrinsically disordered. It's just, to use the words of some theologians on the conservative side, that just makes these folks just cringe. That how could you possibly be in favor of gay rights, for gay sexuality and so forth? Another one is the teaching about evolution, which science, almost universally agrees is the proper model for understanding science and the development of life. But the other side says this really is kind of evil, secular document, doctrine rather, and that we should, so it's these kinds of things that conservatives find extremely distasteful. It kind of, for them, it poisons the well. Also, they feel that liberals are highly secular. They don't believe in God. And it is true that probably the liberal camp of the country has more people who are agnostic or atheists or certainly don't belong to a religious organization. Unitarians are kind of in a funny position because I'm sure there are many, many Unitarians for the God question is sort of bracketed out, and yet are very spiritual and do belong to a church. So you folks in a way are kind of unique. But the fact is that for conservatives, the left rather is kind of a place of secularism and atheism and baby killing and sodomy, and that's kind of the picture. You know, of course, that's a caricature. I mean, there's all kinds of smart conservatives who don't really buy into that completely, but that's kind of the picture. Now, on the other side, let's look at what do liberals think. Well, for them, people on the right are fanatics, Bible thumpers, fundamentalists, kooks, rednecks out in the country with their guns. You know, this is the caricature on that side, that the people on the right are simply out to save souls and nothing else, that their whole worldview is one of extreme conservatism, of opposing science, opposing evolution, opposing the teaching evolution in schools. And so you get these two caricatures of the two sides, and of course those caricatures are not true. Most people are somewhere in the middle on these questions. Most people, for example, think that abortion ought to be possible, at least in some cases. Maybe not just abortion on demand, but certainly in some very difficult cases. That's kind of where the middle is. And the center in America is our strength, but the center is shrinking as people get more and more polarized on one side or the other. And that is not good for government. It's not good for the federal government, for state government, for the government of Costa Mesa, and so forth. So anyway, having said that, what are our common frustrations? Okay, so we talked about the frustrations of each side, which are, a lot of them are suspicions and conspiracy theories and so forth, but there's a lot of common frustrations, and one of my favorite writers, Professor Robert Reich of Berkeley, who heads a group called Common Cause. Some of you are familiar with that organization, a good government organization that works for voting rights and so forth. Anyway, he made a little tour of the country during semesters at Berkeley, and he found that there's a lot of commonality between the left and the right in terms of the fact that the middle class is, along with the middle, politically middle, is shrinking. Take a guy who worked for 20 years at a manufacturing plant in Detroit or Pittsburgh or someplace else, and now he's out of work, and he's got a job paying much, much less, maybe at a bank or maybe even flipping burgers or whatever, and his wife's also working, and they're barely getting by. They're getting by, but boy, it's not the same old world they were in 20 years ago. Or he may be unemployed. The fact is, there's a tremendous amount of disparity in the country between the very rich and the very poor. At the moment, the CEO to worker pay ratio in America is 373 to 1. That is, the typical CEO makes 373 times as much money as the average worker. Now, there's something really just awfully wrong about that. That's just wrong. Salaries have just gone higher and higher. It seems like a CEO gets appointed and he's got to make more money than the other CEO. Or a basketball player gets hired and he's got to make more money than the top player, like LeBron James for the Cavaliers. And on it goes with this upward bidding of absurdly high salaries. There's a sense that I think in the country that amongst both more liberal and more conservative people, that they're getting screwed. That in effect the rich are getting much, much richer and the poor are stagnating. In real terms, wages for the average worker are lower now than they were almost in history. If you take in terms of real dollars in 1980 and 1990, for example, people in the middle, working people, are just not keeping up with inflation, with the cost of living. And so one response to that is, let's vote for Trump, he'll fix it. Or let's vote for Sanders, he'll fix it. Now, I got to tell you again that you know, emotionally, constitutionally, I have a lot more sympathy for Bernie Sanders, but that's me, okay? But you get the point. People are frustrated, so they kind of tend to go one way or the other in terms of who to vote for president. So we have an awfully unhealthy situation in the country, and in my book I tried to speak to this. And so, coming to my final point here, some of the things that we might do with some of the following, and I got to admit that in some ways they're going to sound a little bit like Kumbaya or Blue Sky, okay? But I don't think they are, okay? One of them is better listening. Okay, people do not listen to people on the other side. For example, when was the last time that Wayne LaPierre, the head of the National Rifle Association, and Mr. Gross, the head of the Brady Handgun Control Organization, ever had lunch? I tried to find out. They wouldn't even answer my emails. I even said, I'm a professor, I just want to get some information here. I'm a former columnist for the LA Times, can you tell me? Nothing. Well, I think I know the reason why. They've never had lunch. Okay? That's true of almost all these situations. How many times has the head of Planned Parenthood and the head of the National Right to Life Organization ever sat down and had lunch? Now, you know, that sounds kind of silly, you know what I'm saying. I'm saying, have a real conversation, for goodness sakes. What do you have in common? For example, with pro-life, pro-choice, what about the number of young girls who get pregnant when they're 16 or 17 years old and their future is just sort of screwed? What do? They've got a child at 16. What future do most of those girls have? Some, of course, will manage somehow to struggle through and get a college education. Most will not. Most will be single mothers locked in poverty. Couldn't the two sides talk about that, for example? And let's take the NRA and the Brady gun control folks. Couldn't those two groups get together and say, well, listen, could we not at least promote greater gun safety? After all, when you get a driver's license, you have to take a test. In fact, I have to take my driver's test on February the 6th, folks, so hold on, you know. Ben Hubbard may not be driving after that. You know, I'm hoping I pass. You know, so we have driver's tests. We don't have tests to use a weapon. I mean, I gotta tell you, I carried a weapon in the military, and it's kind of scary. The first thing my commanding colonel said to me when I got my 45 was, Hubbard, don't shoot yourself in the foot. Okay, so I mean, because this is a dangerous weapon. You've got to know how to use it, how to store it, how to take care of it. So it just seemed there was so much that could be done if people would listen and talk to each other. All real living is conversing, is talking to each other, and there's so little talking going on. In Congress, for example, it used to be that Congress members lived in and around Washington, D.C. Now most of them do not. About 20 years ago, Newt Gingrich decided that Congress would basically meet from sort of roughly Tuesday morning through Thursday evening most weeks, unless there was, special business that had to be carried over, and people would then go home. Now that's good for family values in one sense, I guess, to be with your family more often, but it doesn't give anybody a chance to just meet at Costco or at a local diner and just talk to somebody, or the local church. There's little chance for meeting. In fact, for my book, I interviewed Adam Schiff, who's the congressman from Hollywood, that area, and Lockwood Center, Flintwood, and so forth. And he said that he just doesn't have very much contact with people on the other side. He has one close friend that he does have a lot of contact with, but in general, very little contact. So you've got these two solitudes. The two parties just don't even have any social contact with one another. And that seemed to me is very sad. I wonder also how many times the members of the Costa Mesa City Council have had lunch together. How often does Rightheimer and Menzinger ever sit down with Katrina Foley and the others? I'm finding their names right now, and just talk, just without any agenda, not in an official capacity. It's just not enough of that going on. It's not easy to have that happen, but it needs to be done. Desperately needs to be done. So that's one thing. Better communication. I think also, and this goes back to what I said earlier, there needs to be less demonizing of the other side. This notion of just going on and on about how bad the people on the other side, the suspicions of everybody, is just nasty. Even good old Sarah Palin, who I rather intensely dislike, especially after her latest spiel about the fact that Obama was responsible for her sons having had PTSD, and apparently he attacked his girlfriend and so forth. Very sad. I mean, I'm sad for the family in that respect. But as sort of much of a loose cannon as Sarah Palin is, she really suffered a lot of just utter contempt when she first ran for as vice president. Now, it's one thing to dislike her and think her policies are bad, that she wasn't qualified and so forth, but this kind of feeling that this person is just an ugly individual is just not good for business, it seems to me. So, finally, I wish there were some ways that people with differing political and religious standpoints could sometimes have a quiet sanctuary just to sit down and discuss things. It's kind of like having lunch with a member of the other party or the other group, like NRA versus handgun. Places where people could sit down and just calmly talk about how they differ. It's not easy. Some of you know, some of you have had conversations at for example, over a Thanksgiving dinner, where there are certain topics you just don't want to talk about. If you do, it's kind of game over. That's very sad. I know in my class on religion and politics, my first lecture is called The Undiscussables, where we talk about the fact that religion and politics are two things you do need to talk about. But you have to have a venue where that can happen, where nobody's threatened. So you begin by talking about things that we all agree on. For example, that there's too much crime, that the heroin epidemic is just tragic. It's happening, especially in the Northeast. Begin by issues where people can agree that we have a problem. Now, you might differ somewhat on the solution, but at least you know what the problem is. So you create a comfort zone, and then you go on, after you've gone from the great ideas that you all think are important, the importance of the Constitution, of good government, of doing away with homelessness and so forth. Then you get to the tough topics: pro-choice, pro-life, pro-gun, anti-gun, and so forth. You got to start with what you agree with and then go on from there. Well, so that's my story, and I've sticking to it. And my book is an attempt to talk about these sorts of things, the importance of just a better society is what I would like to see happen. I'm just one guy. I'm just one prophet at CalState, but I just do feel that we can do better. And so I hope that maybe a little of what I've said makes some sense. And thank you very much.
Please stand as you're comfortable. We're going to sing